Well, hello, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. Well, it's a Thursday night near the end of the month, and that means that we get the great pleasure of an interview with our good friend, Dr. Professor Darrell Hamamoto. And he's going to join us tonight for a session of enlightenment in the field of cultural forensics, as he does once a month. And it's just so nice to have you back. So, Professor Hamamoto, welcome.
Thank you so much, John. It's wonderful to be back with you and your exciting audience in the live stream here.
Thank you so much. Well, I know you were in the chat room and participating in the show last night with our good friends Mark Kulak of Housatonic Live and David Cranmer Underdown. And we got pretty down, deep into this question of what's really going on with our medical system, in particular, what has been the driving force behind the events of the so-called pandemic. And just to kind of summarize what I would like to ask your opinion on is this, that both of those guys are saying that they are now their hypothesis, because just hypothesis that can change tomorrow. But right now they're thinking that this really is part of an effort to achieve immortality. That the elite people who have, all the money that they could ever use and, the power to command that certain research be done. And this is the scenario of using the medical system to gather data, which is really geared towards their understanding as they've always been trying to, the basic building blocks of life. I mean, remember a couple of years ago when you first gave me the metaphor of the Lego blocks and making life out of Lego blocks. And I think that's where they really still are at in their heads, is that they want that. They get down to the little bitty part of the atom, the neutrino, and then the quarks, and then whatever's next after quarks. I quit counting at that point. But they're trying to figure out the exact way that humanity is constructed by nature, and obviously so that they can then play God and create superhumans. It's almost a fulfillment of Nietzsche's dream of the Übermensch, the Superman. And so this is it's been ringing around in my brain all day that it's science. It sounds like science fiction, but it's also, wow, there's an awful lot of evidence for it. I know you've been paying attention to this stuff, so let's hear your opinion,
Well, if you want
or
to
at
push
least
the
what your evaluation
timeline,
of what Mark and Dave were saying.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
really especially interesting conversation yesterday that you had Wednesday. And for those of you who haven't watched it, I recommend that you go back and take another look at it, or take a look at it. But if you really want to push the timeline back, way back, then we have to talk about this will to immortality. You've mentioned Nietzsche. He said will to power. But I would revise that and say, what is power? Ultimate power, immortality. So
Mm-hmm.
I push it back to the Sumerian times, and that's something that has migrated down through the ages down to the present. So I accept that thesis, that premise, that hypothesis. I'd push the timeline further back. Now, for our purposes in the modern age, I think the timeline in the modern age starts with the planning and the execution and the follow-up of the civilian bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I have a particular professional as well as family and personal relationship with that. I've been studying it very carefully. I'm not a tourist to this topic. Not that this qualifies me as an expert, because the debate rages on amongst medical doctors, ethicists, journalists, you name it. And I don't really want to engage that whole discussion that's been going on for 70 years. All I can tell you is that I lived outside of Hiroshima for 1 year as a Fulbright scholar between 93 and 94. And I visited Hiroshima, the epicenter, at least twice a week, once on the weekend and once during, I took the train. It would take 15, 20 minutes. And I went to the museum and I studied very carefully. I couldn't talk to any of my colleagues at Hiroshima University because it's a forbidden topic. Just like when I was in Okinawa at the other end of Japan, I couldn't talk about the U.S. military and the Battle of Okinawa. They want to talk about Native America or an American state. You want to talk about something distant, but if it's close to home, you can forget about it. It's a blank. So I was on my own, and so I'm very much steeped in the literature of that time, not just the medical and science literature, but also the creative and reportage literature that came out of that era. And most people don't know the name of him. His name is Oe Kenzaburo. He's a most recent recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature. And most people still have their head up the butt of Mr. Miyagi in America. And that's intentional, right? These little characters are put out there. But he wrote 3 or 4 books about Hiroshima in specific. And he remained an ardent pacifist and also an anti-nuclear, and also even though he wasn't from Okinawa, he was from Shikoku, which was not far from Hiroshima. It's right on the other side of the inland sea of Japan, where I was living for a year. It's one of the main islands, Shikoku. But he was an apologist or advocating for justice for the people of Okinawa up until the day he died, which was not that long ago. So I encourage people to read that. There's an entire body of material that we as Americans have been deprived of because we're being shown the same Mr. Miyagi BS in Pearl Harbor, starring whoever whoever the Hollywood star is of the moment, right? And your show is talking, via and I tip my hat. I salute your father's memory in advance of Memorial Day on this Monday. But your show has been delving on a personal level about the Pacific War, World War II. And in doing so, you're unpacking the larger historical truths behind these global conflicts and the forces behind them, which, to answer your question in a long-winded way, has to do with these fundi or bloodlines or black nobility that keep cropping up in your discussion, not just with David Kramer Underdown and Mark Kulaks, but other people that you've had on your show. That's a consistent running theme, and that is for real. That is genuine. And the best current recent example of that is the death of guess who? Tina Toyna, Anna Mae Bullock from Nutbush, Tennessee. How did she go from Nutbush, Tennessee, all the way to living right on Lake Geneva, Switzerland, living in a $75 million shack with her German boyfriend named Elvin Brack, who was almost 20 years her junior. They were a couple for 27 years before they finally tied the knot in 2013, the same year in which she renounced her U.S. citizenship. And guess who she sold her holdings to? Probably at gunpoint, so to speak, because it sounds like cheap. It was a bargain to me, but her likeness, her recordings, it was sold to BMG, which, if you want to unpack the initials, stands for Bertelsmann Musik Gruppe. And for those who know the history, they're kind of like Springer Verlag. They're publishers that have direct connection to the Third Reich. And they had a connection to the establishment going back to the days of the Kaiser. But BMG or Bertelsmann, which owns many, many of the publishers. This is why you and I would never get a contract from Penguin or Random House or a record deal, because they own it. They're not going to allow us to, which is good because they're going to collapse of their own inertia. So they own books, movies, you name it. They're one of the remaining 3 or 4 that are out there. That's what I'm referring to as the Fourth Reich. So Tina Turner, I think through her handler, this guy, Evan, I have to find more about. There's not a lot on him, right? So this is a job for Detroit Dave to research who Irvin Bach really. But they met. It was like a cute meet, romantic comedy back in 1985. And Tina Turner, who wrote 3 autobiographies, or she had 3 growths. She's a product of a whole PR psyop run out of Germany, right? The second phase of her career, say, who can we dust off and bring forward and make her, put her on the track, so to speak, and make her an earner. And that's Tina Turner. So they assigned this guy, young guy, he was 30 years old. She was 46 at the time, to be her escort. And of course, she recently died. And then now we're looking at her net worth, and we're looking at his net worth. His net worth's only $50 million. And that's the exact sum of money that she sold her catalog to BMG. Just like Michael Jackson had to sell his catalog, just like Prince had to sell his catalog, right?
And
It
I
always
think Dylan sold it, didn't he? Yeah.
Dylan sold much of his. Yeah, there was a whole sell-off a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's just tells you these people, they don't really own it in the first place. Every the millionaires that are stars, it's all on a string. That string can be pulled at any time, and
Yeah.
but listen, we've gone a little bit astray from
Oh, sorry.
Hiroshima, and I
Oh,
want
okay.
to pull you back there if you wouldn't mind, and flesh out what you were saying about it's the beginning of what we were talking about last night with the human data project, the gathering of data for the human genome,
Mhm.
so that they can create that immortality that they're craving
All
for.
right. Well, if one wants to talk about data collection and study, I could point you to no better place than all the literature, the science literature laboratory, and they set up shop almost immediately after the detonation
Mhm.
of the bomb in Hiroshima, and same with Nagasaki. And they wanted to have 2 baseline comparison. Hiro means flat. Hiroshima, flat island. Nagasaki, and I've been to both places, is valley, and the radiation was more contained. So they had a really good means of comparing 2 disparate populations separated by hundreds of miles. But there's so much data beyond the anecdotal that's related to this. All you have to do is do a basic search, as I did, and I have a file folders and books and tons of material on it. But I just checked again, and there's all kinds of material that's available to even the casual viewer. So my argument is that that's really the baseline that's being used from today. See, when we're thinking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we're thinking of the kinetic damage, right? But the people who planned it and executed it, which was by all accounts now, even by mainstream historians, say it was unnecessary, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
biological experiment, right? I mean, that's pretty much in the books now.
And the other point is that we also have just assumed that the reason that we did it was to intimidate the Soviet Union. Was it?
Yeah.
It's not. We knew, or at least the powers in our government knew. Truman knew that. MacArthur
Mm.
knew, not Truman. MacArthur knew that they were defeated and ready to surrender, and he always resented that they dropped those bombs. But they
Yeah, he wanted to attack the
no, no,
Soviets. Huh?
he wanted them to surrender so that
Yeah.
he could come back and be the,
No,
the, the
there was
prince
a
of
large
emperor that he
faction of
thought
the
of
U.S.
himself as being.
high military command saying that the U.S. is fighting the wrong enemy. They should have been fighting the Soviets all along, right? So yeah,
Oh yeah,
there's that whole related discussion. I think that's one of the reasons why MacArthur got in trouble, because he was going to run for president and all that, but he had a completely different take on the implications of World War II in its aftermath. So we know that most of these arguments that we were raised on have gone out, and of course, by the way, and that also um, gives validity to what we do every day. It seems like, well, you're talking about stuff that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, but you know what? History is always being rewritten and revised for the uses of the present, and this is a really good example how we know, there was a core of people who would not accept the orthodoxy, no matter how much it was promoted in the curriculum, in the standard history books. There's one guy named Paul Fussell. He was a professor of English. I mean, what did he? He was a veteran, to his credit. Fussel. He wrote a big essay, Thank God for the Atomic Bomb. And then this is where this figure of, we saved 1 million American lives. Okay. So the mythology grows on. But based on my own research and from my own experience in living in Hiroshima for a good year, and also going to the third attack. There was the third nuclear attack on Japan that people don't talk about anymore. That's Fukushima. And I went there the year afterwards to check it out. I couldn't get into the forbidden zone. That was just to remind Japan that we still have a nuclear trigger on you. So don't even consider trying to make nice with the Arab world, who has the oils and whatnot, right? So in other words, I believe I have the bona fides to substantiate my argument. Now, in supporting Diamond Dave's argument, because he keeps mentioning Hermann Josef Müller, or he was actually American, so I shouldn't give him the Germanic pronunciation. Hermann Joseph Müller, right? 1890 to 1967. And I'll just keep it brief here. This is something that was published in 2009, the National Academy of the Sciences, which is the highest level of distinction that any research scientist can achieve. This is Hermann Müller. But I just need to remind all of us here in this discussion that he was the founder of radiation genetics. So he anticipated what was going to happen in the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So you're thinking, well, that's a one-off situation. What does that have to do with us, with our smartphones in 2023, put up right against our ear, or those earbuds sticking right into our brain, directed right against our pineal gland and in the gray matter there, with all the kids doing this? Well, that's ionizing radiation. And this is what was being rolled out in Hiroshima. And the Austrian and German scientists knew this in the 20s and 30s on a theoretical basis, but they needed proof of concept. They needed the mythology. They needed a crisis, a new Pearl Harbor, the original Pearl Harbor. And you remember Pearl Harbor, that's payback. Hiroshima and Nagasaki is payback for Pearl Harbor. That's was the common wisdom that was being bandied about in the 1950s, as I was always reminded of when I was a kid, like I was personally responsible for it. So whenever December 7th came around when I was a kid, I was always hiding. I didn't go out in the street. I didn't go to school because I didn't want to be teased. And I said, yeah, okay. December 7th, wasn't that when Pearl Bailey was bombed? Yeah, I think I remember that. Anyway, most people have forgotten about the propaganda system, but they're still oblivious to the fact that we are the human race now, not just Americans, are under more concerted attack of ionizing radiation than ever in human history, far exceeding Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's being brought to us courtesy of our own 5G system, right? And like I said, the counterparts of Müller, who were in Austria, coming out of the Austria-Hungary Empire, those guys, they had all that data there. They had all the information. And a lot of those people, they're not part of the paperclip story, because we like to talk about Nazis, sexy Nazis of paper. We want to talk about Wernher von Braun, but I want to talk about the average non-party member who had Nazi genocide ideology who were brought in droves that far outnumbered the paperclip people. And that's one of the reasons why on TubeView you have all these pop-up pundits who want to do nothing but talk about sexy Nazis. Because the other people, and by the way, many of those people who were pre-paperclip who were in psychology and psychiatry and what's now called the neurosciences, where the human neural system is being re-engineered through optogenetics over at Stanford currently. And this is the big secret. And this is why the German Nazi secrets, right, is being played up. Almost all of them were Jews. And this was before paperclip, the neuroscientists. And I have all the academic literature that talks about the mass migration pre-paperclip to all the research institutions around America. And that's what we're suffering today. This is why we're seeing the kids with the autism, with Asperger's, named after Dr. Hans Asperger from Vienna, Austria. There's a really good popular science book out right now. It's called Asperger's Children. And it turns out that he was working hand in hand with a third-like scientists, right? Not to cure Asperger's, not to identify it, but this is where me and others are saying, but to manufacture and to bioengineer it. And I was seeing the first generation, the first wave of these children coming into my classrooms. They were called, being on the spectrum, right? It's not a syndrome, you're on the spectrum. And it's now being normalized. It's like a neural diversity is a big term you're going to be hearing more and more as it's being marketed to us as being a normal. So we're building, not you and me, but the bioengineers are building a better blonde beast, if I may borrow the title of someone you cite often, Christopher Simpson. Right? Yeah. Remember that one? Building the better. So but of course they're coming in all ethnicity and race right now. But these are the so-called indigo children. These are the star children. These are the kids on the Asperger's syndrome. And it's all related to this biogenetics. And I'm not going to go into it because I want your channel to stay up as long as possible. But you and I and everybody's watching know what the delivery system is. Beyond the smartphone, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, it was not because of mass formation psychosis like that fraud Dr. Robert Malone, who was at UC Davis for a while, by getting his finishing, instructions, right? He plagiarized this guy who works for NATO, by the way, in Belgium, Matthias Desmet. This book was rushed out. So he talks about mass formation or mass psychosis. It's a terrible book. It's like grad school level if you went to grad school 30 years ago. All right. So the reason I'm mentioning is because they say, well, we suffer from this mass psyops, right? No. You know where it came through? It came through the cell phones. It came through the bird nest. It came from what's that movie? Look Above or Don't Look Up, right? We were all getting these Netflix movies telling us in advance, this is where the big MF is coming from. And the first part of that is mind, and the next part is, what? In German, I think it's Flick. Mind Flick. The Mind Flick was coming courtesy of 5G. And it's one of the gifts that keep on giving from Hermann Joseph Muller and his colleagues. Right, the pre-paperclip people who exfiltrated into to American academia, and they're still doing. There's this guy in who's coincidentally he's German American, right? Maybe this is like a Boys from Brazil deal, they clone these MFs, and they're still out there, at Yale and Liebel, the guy that got rolled up, they sacrificed him, but there's a guy at Stanford who operates under the guise of so-called, optogenetics. But it's the same program in general. Anyway, it's kind of a long-winded, because I wanted to touch upon what you gentlemen were talking about last night, but also tie it into the death of Tina Turner, whose fortune got clawed back into these families that you keep referring to. She sold her holdings to BMG or Bertelsmann for only $50 million. That's not a lot of money. It's not a lot of money. And her handler, Elvin Bach, he's not worth a lot. He's worth a lot more than that on the books. So there's more to that story, and I can't find anything online except for the fact, oh, it's like the plot of When Harry Met Sally. It was a cute, neat rom-com, right? Nora Ephron couldn't have scripted it better. Love at first sight. Tina Turner said, oh, yeah, the first time I met him, my palms started going sweaty. And, there's all kinds of other details in this. I read all the People magazine and Us and the Telegraph, but there's some real journalism there as well. But I think we need to follow up on Tina Turner, just like we need to follow up on Prince, Michael Jackson, and even Bill Cosby. Right. Take any black celebrity who's been clawed back, their fortune clawed back. Now, then we got to look back into the bloodlines.
Yeah.
And these so-called entertainment publishing concerns. I mentioned Springer. Okay, I should hasten to add that Springer was most recently connected to Robert Maxwell, Sir Robert Maxwell, which wasn't his real name. He was Hazadian. He anglicized his name. Most of these guys, like, what's his name? In the U.S. government, his name's really Garfinkel. Garland, Merrick Garland. Merrick Garfinkel, right? So same with Robert Maxwell, who was the father. And the books are out there. I had lunch with Gordon Thomas, who wrote the definitive book on Gordon, not on Robert Maxwell, Sir Robert Maxwell. But that's the father of, as you know by now, Ghislaine Maxwell, and he's connected to Epstein. If you want to read more detailed and follow up, which is more important, really, read Kirby Summers' book, read her Substack, because the story is just beginning. It's just beginning. And my suspicion is that her story is going to lead to what we're talking about today. That's what Epi was really behind, getting down with it over in Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. And that's why he wanted Lieber. And this is why he was cultivating Marvin Minsky over at MIT, the so-called father of AI, artificial intelligence. And he even had Noam Chomsky on the hook. That was devastating for me to learn that. There's a picture of him because he was my hero during the Vietnam War. He was the only one of the few political figures in academia who was against the Vietnam War. That's why I became a leftist, not because of Marxism per se, but because the right back then, the conservatives, when they were really like, yeah, let's bomb Hanoi back to the Stone Age, Anita Bryant, the hardcore Republicans, Spiro Agnew and Richard Nixon, right? That to me was conservative, and that to me was republicanism. So I had to really go through a really big shift before I had to come around to Orange Man. But even he has his issues, and he has some compromise. And back to put it lightly, right? But that's another discussion. Yeah, Donald Trump, another guy who anglicized his name, who has connections to the scientific or the science establishment himself. So anyway, that's my comment on your Thursday trio.
That was a tour de force, really, and I thank you for it. I love the idea of adding what you said about the collection of data being connected to the introduction of ionizing radiation into our society. Mm-hmm. And to kind of see, they need to see, well, how much can they get away with without people noticing it, or what are the health effects generally? Things like how far away were they, and well, that led, of course, into the experimentation in Korea by the dropping the bugs and things that they don't want to talk about. Mm-hmm. That all of these things are a moral watershed that was crossed somewhere in the middle of World War II or among certain people, it really is tied in with the Sullivan and Cromwell, Allen Dulles, John Foster Dulles, and the extreme right wing that was represented by that branch of the OSS.
Mhm.
It's funny when you look at the OSS of the time, it was really formed in order to be of service to FDR. And that meant that they were going to work with the communists in Europe. And,
Mm.
let's win the war against Germany. That they were very much, Donovan was ready to work with anybody to defeat the Germans. However, once it became clear that the Germans were going to lose, then the other half of the OSS types decided, well, we're going to have to set up something with the Germans so that we can turn around and defeat the Soviets, and that has been the turning point of American history, where
Mhm.
along with that they decided to make all kinds of compromises, such as, well, we will bring in the paperclip soldiers, Nazis. We will bring in the ones you spoke of, the ones that are off the radar screen, but perhaps just working in a lab somewhere.
Mhm.
They brought in thousands of them, according to what we studied about my father, who apparently had the job of vetting these files for J. Edgar Hoover. So we know that there's been a change in what we will do to get what we want. And that is exactly what's been going on with just letting things happen, letting bad things happen. Oops, that mine just got the wall of the mine just collapsed, and now all of the metal stuff is in the formerly pristine water that was, this beautiful river, and now you can't drink out of it. Oops, these things happen one after another. Oops, there goes a train derailment. Oops, all these things they're letting all these things happen. They
Yeah.
have a state of mind that is very much like the Nazis, that, yeah, we've got to get rid of some people in order to make some progress here. That idea of immortality is reaching to say we're more than these mere humans. We are nearer to God. We are almost God ourselves, and that mentality allows them to treat other humans as if they were cattle or sheep, or worse, and
Mhm.
just discard them and use them as subjects, as we talked about so much last night. That no, maybe they don't want to kill us; they just want to examine us and have us, bend over and roll up our sleeves whenever they say. That's
Yeah.
that goes along
Mm.
also with the willingness to drop a, a murderous weapon, the atomic bomb, on mostly civilian populations
Mhm.
in order to uh, prove some scientific or answer some scientific question that they have. That is how bad it is, coupled with the always present fear of the elites, of crowds, of too many people, of, oh no, there's too many peasants, we got to have a
Mhm.
war, hello, cousin Henry, let's go to war for next summer. What do you say? Oh, sure, man, I got too many peasants too. Let's get rid of some of them.
And they're related, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's the story of Europe. And now that, they found, I think it was Bertrand Russell that said at first, or most famously, that the war was just not that efficient a way of controlling the population, so they have to come up with other stuff, and now we are experiencing what appears to be the other stuff.
Mhm.
On the other hand, as I say, maybe
Mm.
they don't want us dead right away, but they definitely want us completely under control, willing to wear a mask, willing to take whatever injections that we are prescribed, and to give up our critical thinking, which I think is really the pride of American education, is that we develop
Mhm.
critical thinkers, but they don't want them anymore. They haven't wanted them for a long time.
Well, can we pivot to American education? Because one of the problems that I've decided that's holding us back is this focus on paperclip Nazis and sexy Nazis and Werner von Braun. I mean, it's all interesting and it's not untrue, but it's holding us back. And if I may ask you a personal question, if I haven't already, I don't mean to put you on the spot, John, but I think your audience would like to know a little bit about the man behind the legend, you. But let me ask you, were you ever a part, because we're almost the same age, were you ever part of a gifted program at school, like when you were growing up, K through 12, or a special class or special, you know,
No, no,
you never were?
well, I went to public school until ninth grade, and then I had 4 years of Catholic high school.
Ah,
And in the Catholic high school, and I think I got into some advanced science lab or something, but no. And then the great fiasco was when I started college. I went to William and Mary, and I was really thrilled to get admitted there. And so I got there, and I didn't have anybody, to help me go through the signing up for classes thing. So they just had in the big gym, they had all these tables, you know how they do it. And you say, oh, I need to take, I need to take English, and I need to take 3 electives. And so what am I going to do? And so I ended up and said, I want to do physics. So I went over to the physics table, and they said, oh, would you like to be in the advanced physics lab? And I was like thinking, hey, I got it going on. I got admitted to William and Mary. I must be pretty smart. So yeah, I'll go with this advanced physics lab. Oh boy, what a mistake.
Did you
Uh,
get blown out by any chance of a class?
oh God. Yeah. The thing they didn't tell me is that they assumed that you knew calculus backwards and forward before you went into that class. And I had never studied
Mm,
calculus. So but I mean, I fought my way through it. I think I got a C. But I knew that that was not going to be my
mm.
future. And so, no, I never went into those talented and gifted
Okay.
things. I was more of a B than an A person.
Well, I think one of the reasons why is, and this is fortuitous, as far as I'm concerned, you went to Catholic school instead of the public track. If you were on the public track, you would have been tested just like the rest of us mice, just lab mice, just like the rest of us lab mice were being lined up for quote unquote polio vaccines in the public schools.
Yeah, well, I had to take one too, as you know.
Yeah, yeah, and so they were doing the biomedical, but they were also doing the social psychological testing at the same time because we're talking about paperclip, right? Those
Yeah,
people were aging out. They had to the people who run these institutions had to find a way to replenish that pool of really really bright people. How are they going to do it? Through testing. So you asked, and I'm not going to bore your audience by talking about, how my book is coming out. There's nothing more boring than hearing that. Um, but I'm finding out that these channels of the so-called gifted programs. This is something that people who are watching the show can think about in their own schooling, because you might have never have connected what you were doing, being tested all the time, relentlessly, or being in these special classes, but what they were doing is to find the next Merrick Garland or one of the second tier people, the ones who didn't go to Yale, right? Who didn't go to Harvard Law School, right? And that is the blonde beast, so called, that keeps the system of 2023 going. It's not the Tony Fauci's, it's the lab mice who work under him who have been screened through these gifted programs not
yeah,
to question anything, but they have smarts. And they've been told that they're going to rule the world through this new technocratic world order. Now, let me tell you something psychic, right? This is for real. This is a true story. All right. Just like it's true story that I was talking last time I was with you, John, about Beltane.
hmm
And sure enough, in the little college town of Davis, there were 2 murders, and one that almost 3. There's 2.5 murders by this one guy who was a. So I could see it. I could feel it. I knew that there was some bad. there was a bad mood on the rise. All right, so that's not the psychic phenomenon I want to talk about there. I want to talk about the psychic phenomenon I had yesterday while I was going through my chapter on Philip K. Dick, the great writer. He had Blade Runner. Many of his novels and short stories have been adapted to cinema. Total Recall, right, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the son of an Austrian police Nazi. And it was remade with Colin Farrell, made not once. This is Philip Dick, right? So he's an important writer. So I was looking through my what I wrote and my notes and whatnot, and I was making my little corrections and notes to myself. And I said, you know what? I really need to get on TubeView and see what Tessa Dick, if she has a presence on YouTube. And she was the final wife of Philip K. Dick. He was married 5 times. And she's about our age, but she has her own YouTube channel. So on impulse, something drove me. This is the psychic part. This is yesterday morning to look up Tessa Dick. And guess what? As soon as I went in there, she was live streaming.
Mm-hmm.
She was live. It was not a video. She was streaming live. And it was like toward the end of a 2-hour stream. So I started asking her questions in the live chat about information that I was culling from her book about her relationship with Philip Dick, and that they were both products of these so-called gifted programs. Dick in his generation during the 40s, and then Tessa Dick during the 60s, right? And apparently you escaped it, I escaped it, and she grew up in a very nearby to me by Disneyland in the same area, and we were almost the same age. So I started asking these questions, and they were all lining up with what I was suspecting. So get this, John, and I don't mean this to sound self-serving or self-flattering. I'm just saying this is one of those psychic deals, because she saw my name in the chat. She says, "Oh, are you the Professor Hamamoto whose channel I watch on YouTube?"
Oh boy.
Yeah, and I go, oh, my God, this
Wow.
is like something out of a Philip K. Dick novel. He died at age 53 a number of years ago, not long after Blade Runner was debuted in the theaters, Ridley Scott film. So this is what went on yesterday. So I said, oh, okay, I'm on the right track. Yeah. And that's why I asked you the question. It seemed like a kind of random about the gifted programs, because I think this is really an important track that all of us need to be looking at. Yeah, well, let's look at the sexy paperclip Nazis, but let's look at our own lives and who's feeding the machine of today. Who are the drones? I call them the techno golem, from the Central European AI character, pre-AI golem. In the movie, 1920 silent film by Paul Majorek, or the novel was Majorek, right? So that's what I mean by the golem there, because that is what is feeding the machine, and we get caught up on these personalities, right? It could even be we get hung up on Herman Mueller, but I'm interested in the second and the third tier and the fourth tier foot soldiers that keeps the system moving along, right? Your Anthony Fauci can exit the historical stage. We haven't heard from for thank goodness for a number of weeks now, and most of us have forgotten about him. But the system hasn't changed; it's still around. Why is it still around? Because these mentally gifted programs that were put in the late 40s and 1950s, as they were injecting us with the Jonas Salk miracle wonder drug. I'm being ironic, right? They were also injecting us with a giant mind flick. And they were trying to figure out, okay, this guy, John O'Loughlin, he comes from a pretty good lineage. Look at his father's military record. He's fed, man. He's FBI, he's CIA. And, they had the whole workup on you, John.
Well, you see, that's what they did to my dad, right?
They had the workup on him. They had the workup on his father.
This was back in the 30s when they were doing this to people, and that is just that this is your story. I mean, this is servitors.
Yeah.
This is instead of importing them from Germany, now we just make them ourselves.
Grow your own.
But you make a wonderful point. The whole idea of of mental ability testing and all of that comes in through these same people.
Yes.
The Freudian line that gets into the military thinking, and then they're going to test all of the soldiers to see, what their IQ is, supposedly,
Yeah, yeah.
But and isn't it interesting, that what 10, 12 years ago I read that they don't want the smartest people to be cops anymore.
That's right.
It's like, oh no, you're too smart. We can't accept you. Oh, you'd be a terrible cop. You'd think your way through things that you should be shooting. You know, you'd figure things out instead of doing what we want you to do. And that is the problem with people like my dad and people like me and you and Mark and David is they're like, no, we're critical thinkers. We had the benefit of education and
Yeah.
parenting and
Well, I'm
the,
sure we are on the radar,
the
each of us.
ability to express, to follow our curiosity,
Yeah.
that natural idea of what's really behind this. That's a good thing to follow that. The
Right.
people now are being scolded for looking behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Don't look behind the curtain, Dorothy.
Hmm. So, University of Pennsylvania, I'm sure William Mary's probably the same way. They're dropping testing. They're dropping, all those horrible exams that we had to take in order to get to college, right?
Good.
What? They're dropping them because, for one thing, they know everything they need to know about you, the kids
Yeah,
on the iPhone from the 5G. They know everything. They know your psychological profile. You've
yeah,
entered all your whole history there. So they said, okay, we're going to take, A, B, and C. We don't need to go through the educational testing service anymore, ETS, which, by the way, comes out of OSS, the assessment of men. Henry Murray, who was at Harvard, who also ran a longitudinal gifted program in which Theodore Unabomber Kaczynski came out of. They had him tracked too. He was 16-year-old freshman brought in, and the rest of the story. But it didn't end. And again, we get caught up with the personnel of the Unabomber. But we are all the Unabombers, John. We all have these triggers that are just waiting to be saying, okay, line up. We say line up. CNN on the 5G says you need to do this and this and this. Yes, sir. Where do we do it? Because that seed has been implanted. The psychosocial conditioning was implanted in the 1950s, and it needed to be reactivated through these ionizing radiation devices called the so-called smartphones. Right? They can measure our level of anxiety,
yes,
social anxiety, all of it. So anyway, we're way, as much as I like the EIR people, and I learned a lot from reading their earlier work, and their current work is excellent. That train left the station a long time ago. It really did. That train is, that whole metaphor, it's a dead metaphor of a train that left the station. But there's a whole ranges of social inquiry and historical inquiry that are of historical importance and intellectual ballast that we require. But so far as solutions are concerned, we're going to find ourselves chasing our tail over and over again. However, if we start examining these gifted programs, which have been renamed now into GATE now, talk about occult word magic, GATE, portal, it's no
yeah,
longer called MGM, mental gifted, it's called GATE. GATE what? The gate to hell, gate to the purgatory.
yeah,
We start talking about budgets and money and hitting them where all these psychotherapists are coming out of, who I fought tooth and nail in my previous place of employment, who are running the world now. These are the testors, and we are the testees. And I don't mean that in a double entendre. We're getting kicked in the testes, we
yeah,
testes. But these are the characters, man. That's not the Nazis, not the paperclip people. A lot of their research, went into this. But the persons who are doing it are in these teacher education programs at Columbia University, or Antioch College, or Berkeley, wherever there's teacher training, the state universities are hotbeds. And this is where, not coincidentally, where all the so-called CRT and the GLBTQ plus, that's where it's all coming from, the PSYOPs, because what they're doing is putting up a smokescreen for the real action, which is the training and testing for people who are going to put forward to feed the machine, the servers of empire, as I talked about it. So let's defund them. Let's not defund the police. Let's defund the psychotherapeutic establishment, right? They're hiring more therapists in universities than they're hiring professors. They make professors into part-timers. The people who are full-time now, and I know this from my own personal observation, are these psychotherapists who are now occupying faculty offices. And pretty soon there's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio between student and therapist. I would hear some of these psychotherapists at UC Davis saying, I have people lined up outside my door and I have to ask them, don't you have a class to go to? And they go, no, this is much more important to me. I need to be in therapy. I don't need to study calculus or history or sociology. I want to talk about my feelings and my emotion and my safe space. And I want to talk about all my hurts. And they're glad to feed into it. But what you're doing is just like you're going into the confession booth. The priest is getting the feel of the community he's serving, and he's taking all that information that's given to him in confidence, supposedly, and he's feeding it upstairs to the cardinal. And the cardinal kicks it upstairs. There's a book by, I think it was Malachi Martin wrote a book about, and he was a Jesuit priest. He wrote a book about confession and what that is. That is the grid that the current psychotherapeutic establishment stole when they hijacked our education and captured the American Republic. Those are the drones that are keeping Merrick Garfinkel in power, and Barack Obama, right? And they're the ones who are going to bring forward the icon of the beautiful Black woman, Michael Obama, to the presidency in 2024, right? Remember the song by Frank Zappa, Electric Aunt Jemima?
No, I don't remember that one.
Oh, yeah, man. Oprah Winfrey is going to run your life. She's a BBM, a beautiful Black woman.
Yeah.
Going to be a beautiful Black woman on one end. We're going to be like sandwich, John. It's going to be a beautiful Black woman on the left, and it's going to be Mamacita on the right.
Well, she was at the big meeting that we started off the show with last night, reading from the big meeting in London with Ted Turner, the Rockefellers. Bill Gates was the host, and all of the big money there. And who was there with them was Oprah Winfrey. So she's there on the beginning of the great human genocide project back in 2009 when they had their big meeting.
You got it.
Another note from the EIR folks is that our good friend Dennis Speed, who is just a brilliant man who MCs a lot of their presentations, had the pleasure of interviewing him about a year and a half ago. And one of his things, he was the same way. He went to a Catholic high school in Connecticut, got recruited into I can't remember the name of the college, but it's one of those smaller Jesuit colleges, and said, they were recruiting him. They wanted him, to be one of their people, and he said no, and he walked away from it. And so that must have been in the same. He's the same age as us about. So the same thing was going on with him in Connecticut, and it is a Jesuit thing. It is, it does date back to using the priests as an intelligence service, and it was. I think it was Richard Helms that said that the Jesuits had the best intelligence service in the world. So that of course use of priests now has been transferred to the use of psychologists.
Yes.
Which is much more in keeping with their whole ability, to influence us in subtle ways through public relations. And but gosh, the explosion of psychology, and it's just getting, as you say, worse and worse, because Everybody's going to be turning to psychologists to help them solve their problems, and then you'll get a prescription for something from somebody, and
Mhm.
off you'll go with some crazy regimen that's going to keep you lost in life, and you'll never figure it out. Uh,
Right.
they want people to be lost. They want people to not understand things, and to deny the possibility that there's anything beyond what you can see, taste, feel, and smell, such as spirituality. I think without myself, without a reliance on spiritual means, I would be lost. And I really think that depriving children of things like confidence that, there is something more than just doing your homework, for goodness sakes. Life is magic. Life is incredible, and they want to take the magic out of life and turn us into these, you know, automatons, zombies. We're not going to let it happen, are we?
We are not going to let it happen, John, because we reversed engineered it. We lived it, for one thing. So there's something to be said for that. And we've, through our parents' hardships and our our grandparents, and looking at history, reading it, reading the EIR articles, especially during the time when Lyndon LaRouche himself was quite active intellectually and contributing. We're figuring it out, and it's being spread all over. And there's a rebellion. By the way, here's the good news. There's a rebellion that's taking place within the MFCC ranks itself. That stands for Marriage and Family Counselors. Those are the therapists that are creating all this mischief on behalf of Mayorkas, who's another crypto, by the way, along with Merrick Garfinkel, because it's a golem process. It's essential European golem uh, takeover, with psychology. Going back to the history, psychology, Freud. One of the reasons why they brought Jung in, they said, well, we need a non-Jew to be in here. This is becoming synonymous with like a Jewish science. And we need, but Jung had his own ideas too, and he had his own problems too, right?
Well, and
So
then
this
from
is this is
young,
this is
you
something
know,
we need to talk about instead of the sexy Nazis all the time.
we talk about Freud, we talk about Jung, we talk about Jung and Alan Dulles, and then it all comes right back to uh, the tragedy of our lifetimes. But
Yeah.
it's also an amazing time to be alive, and I'm really grateful to be able to spend some time with you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, John, my friend, my colleague. I wouldn't have it any other way. This is what life is about: struggle and combat.
Well, okay. Well,
Okay.
happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow morning at 11 Eastern Time for a live chat with you folks. So I'll bring along whatever's on your mind, and we'll talk about it. Bye now.